Dear brothers and sisters, we continue to talk about the life and the biography of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the last khutbah, we stopped at the incident where his mother died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was 6 years old. And we showed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no favoritism towards anybody. Allah looks at all humanity as one with regards to whether they worship Him or not. But Allah will not favor anyone just because he's a mother or a father of a prophet. The prophets are the most beloved to Allah and the closest to Allah and the best worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only way to save oneself in the sight of Allah or in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to worship Him only. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bih. Allah does not forgive anyone if he dies in a state of polytheism, worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, one of the most beloved prophets to Allah, the second prophet after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in ranking in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Himself, his father, died as a mushrik despite the da'wah and the calling of Ibrahim alayhi salam for his father to join him. We know from the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that his most beloved person who raised him and looked after him and cared for him and protected him, his uncle Abu Talib, he also, despite the calling of the Prophet ﷺ, at the last moment he wouldn't say the Shahadat Tawheed, that I acknowledge that there is no one worthy of worship. Even if he just said it without practicing it, if he just said it, he would have saved himself from being in the fire of hell forever. His sins would have been changed from sins to good deeds. But subhanAllah, Allah accepts the very minimal. Allah deserves to be worshipped day and night. If people did nothing but made sujood for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night, not eat, not drink until they die, still they have not fulfilled the right of Allah. But Allah would accept from a person, even on his deathbed, after fighting against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen and killing the people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even on his deathbed, if he just acknowledged with his tongue that there's no one worthy of worship but Allah, Allah will accept that from him and will save him from the fire of hell. But subhanallah, a person lives and dies in a state of polytheism and not wanting even to acknowledge with his tongue, he deserves what he gets. He will deserve it. This happened, unfortunately, to the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, happened to the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Prophet ﷺ was prohibited from making even istighfar for his mother, his own mother. Imagine this. How strong is this admonition for us? That not to depend on anything, but to depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in being saved from His wrath. To depend on Him and really worship Him alone. Not think that anything in this universe has any power but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not give any kind of devotion of the heart, reliance of the heart, fear or love, real love except to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything comes after that. Nothing controls your life, controls your future, your prosperity, your health, the health of your children, the health of the health of your wife, or anything that you care about except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to know that. So the next incident in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we have documentation, historical documentation of, is the fact that he, as a boy, worked as a shepherd. He looked after goats and sheep. And I'm only mentioning what we have firm documentation and authentic information from the historical point of view about the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because stories are easy to make up and people make up stories about famous people all the time. But we as Muslims only accept what is authentic historically. So Prophet ﷺ, he said in that hadith, is in the book of Bukhari, he says, there's not a single prophet except that he worked as a shepherd or he looked after sheep and goat. This is the wisdom of Allah to choose them for this kind of job. So this job has a big significance which I will mention. And then they asked the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba did, even you, Prophet of Allah, you did the same? You worked as a shepherd, you looked after sheep and goat? He says, yes, I did that for a small amount of money in return for the people of Mecca. Prophet ﷺ could have relied on his uncle who was wealthy. His tribe was wealthy. His family was wealthy. He could have relied on them. He didn't have to do this. But Allah chooses for His Prophet the best status, the best behavior. And the best behavior of any human being is to do whatever he can to rely on himself. Prophet ﷺ said this also in a hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud. In a hadith, let me see what the hadith is, if I can find the reference. The hadith is also in Bukhari, عن al-Miqdam, narrated by al-Miqdam, that the Prophet ﷺ said that you cannot consume more lawful and more blessed and better than what you earn from the working of your own hands. And then he says, and the Prophet of Allah, Dawood alayhi salam, used to work with his own hands to, earn his living. And Prophet ﷺ mentioned Dawood alayhi salam because he was a king. He could have relied just on the wealth of his subjects. But he still, despite being a king, and despite having the best kind of fasting, he used to fast every other day. Despite having the best kind of qiyamul layl, khairul siyam siyamu Dawood, wa khairul qiyami qiyamu Dawood. As Prophet ﷺ told us this. He had the best kind of fasting schedule and the best praying schedule at night. He used to pray for half of the night and so on. The hadith of Dawood alayhi salam, and then sleep part and then wake up again before Fajr and pray again. So imagine this, praying so much at night and fasting every other day. Being a king at the same time, he would earn his living from his own hands, subhanallah. Prophet ﷺ taught us this, and even when he was a boy, this is what he did himself. He did not rely on the wealth of his family. Also, another thing we know about the Prophet ﷺ that is authentic during his teen years, that Allah protected him from indulging in any kind of indecency or lewd behavior or profanity, or all these things that can happen in parties, for instance. Especially those are the parties of pagan people who did not worship Allah or fear Allah. Those kind of people, sometimes, some women used to sometimes make tawaf in Mecca totally naked. Totally naked. Imagine this, and they considered this an act of worship. But anyhow, Prophet ﷺ, Allah protected him from all this. He used to, as you see, throughout the day he would be outside of the city looking after the sheep and goat, not mixing with people who can spoil and taint his heart. And then he mentions that in a hadith, in a narration that is narrated by Ibn Hibban in his authentic book, and by Al-Hakim through Ali ibn Abi Talib, that he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that I never had the intention to do something evil before my prophethood in the pre-Islamic era at time of Jahiliyyah, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected me from indulging in it. So even when that whispering comes, when that nafs tells him to do anything, he says it only happened twice. Subhanallah, look at this. Look how pure he was. Even as a teenager, even before the prophethood, look at how pure he was. You cannot find this in somebody who was raised as a Muslim today. Only twice he felt like going and partying like other young men do. So he said that I was with another boy looking after the sheep, and I said to him, can you take care of my sheep along with your sheep? I want to go and party like other boys do and other teenagers do. So he said that he did go, and then when he approached Mecca, at the outskirts of Mecca, he started hearing some sounds, and then this is how the habit was at night. It was all sounds of music and dancing and people jubilating. So this is this atmosphere that Allah protected him from, protected him from during his teenage years as he grew up. So what happened is, he says, I started hearing some music and laughter, musical instruments and laughter. And then I asked somebody as I was walking, what is happening? He says, somebody's getting married. And this is like the music coming from a wedding. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, I listened a little bit to the sound, and then suddenly, I don't know what happened. I only woke up the next day when the sun was, hitting or coming against my skin, my face. So basically Allah put him to sleep that moment even at the outskirts of Mecca where he was when he started listening to that music, before he could see anything and before he could enjoy anything. And he woke up next morning, only the heat of the sun woke him up. And he says, you know, one other time I said to my friend the same thing. I will go to Mecca and party. And he says, I went and the same exact thing happened to me. He says, from that time I said to myself, I will never do this again. Subhanallah. A sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will happen to any one of us, but alhamdulillah, it doesn't happen to us like this. We indulge in sins, but sometimes we go one time to indulge in that sin and Allah makes something happen. Your car breaks down, or you fall into a hole or something, and your leg breaks, or something bad happens to you. That is how you are woken up. وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُمْ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَدْنَى دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So when we do sins, Allah sends signs to us as well that you're doing something wrong. Wake up, or otherwise the next punishment is going to be stronger and more painful. You can go and then an accident happens, or your car breaks down, as I mentioned, or something else. So before we finish, I will quickly mention some points about being a shepherd and looking after the sheep. Because if Allah chose that job for every prophet, it means that this job or this activity in particular does build certain things in the personality of the human being. It teaches that human being to be patient, because you have to stay there for hours and hours throughout the day into the night, looking after sheep that don't understand you. You cannot even converse with them. You're just alone, just watching the sheep and caring for them. And then if you sometimes you can get hungry or thirsty and you're outside of the city, you have to endure the hunger and thirst until you get enough food. Sometimes if you want to sleep, you have no bed out in the desert. You would have to sleep on the ground and endure the heat of the sun, and then maybe the cold in the night, because obviously he said he would even do it at night. You look at these two stories, they happened at night. Into the night he would also look after the sheep. But also the courage to be out there. Try one day to go out in the farms, even nowadays. Just go outside in the farms outside of the city alone and just try to walk in the prairies here. Even nowadays, see how scared you will be. You would be afraid that some kind of coyote will come to you, or some kind of other wild animal will come to you. But at that time, they were bandits as well. They were thieves that can steal and kill you. Prophet ﷺ learned to be courageous, to have a strong personality through living this kind of life as he grew up. Also to depend on himself and earn his own living. That's another good quality that he learned. Also to be kind and merciful to these animals. These animals need so much patience to look after. And if they are calving, they're having birth, you have to look after that. You have to be humble. You have to have humility, because their feces will come on you, their urine will come on you, their blood will come on you, and you will have to care for them and the new babies. All this stuff teaches so much caring for the human being. This is the kind of personality that Allah builds, so that this kind of personality will be caring for other human beings, guiding them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being patient towards them, enduring all the obscenities that you might be receiving and getting from them, and so on. Inshallah, we'll stop here. We'll make some announcements after the salah.